Ban Ki-moon has said that the world is overarmed and underfinanced. Worldwide military spending is roughly $1.7 trillion. How do we create a disarmed world?
Well, by ending the expenses that we're devoting to finding ways to destroy ourselves, and actually recognizing what the great Smedley Butler said, which is right up there. War is a racket, the few profit, the many pay. The Iraq War alone cost several $1 trillion. It was very successful in placing Iraq under Iranian influence, destroying the country, killing hundreds of thousands of people, driving millions of refugees out, instigating a sectarian conflict which is now tearing the whole region to shreds. It's a good expenditure of several $1 trillion. I don't know the funds that are devoted to the Libya attack, but the effects are kind of similar. The effects of the spending alone is, of course, an enormous drain on the economy, but a benefit to many others. It's not just war that's a racket, but also preparation for war. So the nuclear system, for example, there was a recent study by a colleague of mine, Jonathan King, which you probably saw, which shows that military contractors are just gaining enormous amounts of taxpayer largesse just from building up the nuclear weapon system, which is a terrible danger to all of us. But none of this is graven in stone. The question how to end it is, we all know, these policies can be changed, but only by concerted, dedicated public action devoted to them, which has to at least begin by understanding what's going on. Then comes the organization and the activism of the kind that you've been carrying out for many years and can change the policies.
Thank you. Transformation is a word widely used in scientific and intellectual discourse about social and environmental change. What do you think about the approach to transformation to making change? How do you understand it?
Well, there are some very significant transformations underway and have been for some time now, accelerating. One of them, the most threatening of all, is the belated beginnings of recognition that we're systematically destroying the conditions for decent human survival, and not in the distant future, not thousands of years, decades. Environmental catastrophe is very serious, and we're rushing towards it. And it's being done with eyes open and virtually amazingly little commentary. So, for example, a couple of days ago, the business press in the New York Times, the business section of the New York Times, had reports on the efforts of the energy corporations to have the government rescind a ban on energy exports in there for several decades. And there's a lot of discussion of the pros and cons, this effect, that effect. Not a single word on the fact that this will accelerate the race to destruction by increasing the impact of global warming. Just not mentioned. And that's typical. It's a lot of euphoria about 100 years of energy independence without mention of the fact that this energy independence will put us all underwater, and bad enough for us, but monstrosity for places like, say, South Asia and others. That's one transformation. Other transformations are much slower, unfortunately, are in our slow beginning to try to confront some of these threats. There are two major shadows that hover over everything we discuss. One is this, the other is nuclear weapons. As long as the nuclear weapon system is intact, we're all in severe danger. And it's not just intact, it's being modernized and expanded, contrary to solemn commitments to produce it. The transformation of public apathy to public concern and to public engagement is just necessary for survival at this point. And you can list issue after issue around the world where much the same is true. But these two fundamental problems are so far-reaching that almost everything, no matter how awful, pales in comparison with them.
Thank you. Here's a question I'm sure you've had before. Do you think a peaceful capitalist world is possible? And based on what your thinking is, what ought movement strategies be?
Well, I think a first question we could ask is whether a capitalist world is possible. We're certainly very remote from it. It's called capitalism, but what is that supposed to mean? Is it a market society? Has our economy developed through market principles? I mean, just take, say, the American economy. We could add that Britain is the same, Germany is the same, Japan's the same, and so on. The U.S. developed the economy for 100 years from the founding of the Republic to this late 19th century was based primarily on slave labor, hideous slave labor camps, which produced the basic economy, the basic commodity that led to manufacturing, commerce, the financial institutions, all developed on the basis of hideous slave labor camps that would have impressed the Nazis. That plus clearing of the country of its indigenous inhabitants. Are these market principles? And it goes on like that. I mean, take this thing over here. And in fact, the high-tech economy generally, much of it developed in places just like this, with public funding for many years. The hard, risky, creative, costly work is carried out substantially at public expense. Later, decades later, handed over to private enterprise for profit making. So basically a system of public subsidy, private profit. That's a capitalist society. Take, say, the financial institutions, which have grown enormously during the neoliberal period. Almost half of corporate profits came from financial institutions right before the last crash, for which they were largely responsible. Where do they make their profit? Well, actually, there was an IMF study recently which tried to analyze the profits of the big American banks, J.P. Morgan Chase and the others. It determined that their profits come almost entirely from U.S. taxpayers in various ways. The main one is an implicit but understood government insurance policy. It's called Too Big to Fail, which gives them access to cheap credit, gives them incentives to carry out risky, hence profitable transactions because they'll be bailed out if it goes wrong. The business, and that's on top of the bailouts. The bailouts are not by no means the main part of it. The business press tried to give a number to this, estimated maybe $80 billion a year, essentially their profits. What's that got to do with capitalism? Take the so-called trade agreements. They're not trade agreements. The so-called free trade agreements, which they're even less free trade agreements. Highly protectionist, devised to ensure profits, beyond the scale of avarice to pharmaceutical corporations, media corporations, and so on. Radically opposed to free trade. Most of them are investor rights agreements, which don't have to do with trade at all, just various ways to enrich and protect investors. They're certainly not agreements, at least if people are part of their countries, because most people are opposed to them. So again, where's capitalism? I mean, capitalism is there's a residue of capitalism in the concentration of power in the hands of unaccountable private tyrannies, essentially, and the wage labor system is, to the extent it functions, you can call it capitalism, but it's a small part of the system. Now the question is whether this state capitalist conglomerate can exist in a peaceful world. It's pretty hard to imagine, because it's closely linked to states which have their own power interests, closely linked, largely protecting the power and rights of concentrations of domestic power, and they quickly come into conflict. It's also very important to recognize that security of the population is just not a high concern of states. If you look at security policy over the years, you very quickly see that security means security for state power and for private concentrations of power, with the effect on the general population very secondary. No time to go through the details, but it's very dramatic when you run through the actual history. So can this system survive, live in a peaceful world? Well, it doesn't look too likely. If you look at history and look around the world, you can see that it's not working very well.
Thank you.